briefly which organisation you're from, and maybe a bit of context as well before sharing your experiences. Thank you.
Sure. Hello. Just give me a wave if you can hear, if that's all right. Yeah, hello. Lots of friendly faces. That's awesome. So yeah, my name is Lewis Hu. I run an organisation called the Science Ceilidh. And with that, we support communities around creativity, curiosity, and health and well-being across Scotland, both in kind of school settings, but also particularly in that older meaning of Ceilidh, a gathering in community settings as well. And you can see some of our partners with New Scots on the line and young people, which is really exciting. And obviously, we've had to reimagine what a gathering looks like at the moment, which like lots of other people. And so particularly in the context of building online communities, I was going to talk about our project with the Scottish Libraries and Information Council, which support libraries across Scotland, and Fun Palaces, which is running a 5-year kind of action research project on this idea of cultural democracy. So how do we support communities to lead, recognise the skills they have, and support the making of culture rather than consuming it? And so with that, we've had to rethink about how can we connect with communities in that way that's local, that's supporting people offline as well as online. And so we've developed this community of practitioners. So it's a Facebook group called the Culture and Wellbeing Community Network Scotland. And with that, we're running kind of weekly sessions led by peers on topics that are particularly pertinent at the moment. So looking at social isolation, the research behind the benefits of creativity and health and well-being, letting young people lead, connecting people offline. So with that in mind, my 3 top tips and learnings so far is the first one is definitely feel like don't let perfect get in the way of good. So especially in the early days, I don't think there's any platform that is perfect. We were very aware that Facebook has its challenges as a platform, but we did get feedback from a lot of groups. It is where a lot of people already are. And actually, especially now at this time when there's so much stuff going on, we felt like actually it was important that we had both a physical and emotional presence that wasn't too demanding, that didn't require downloads of new things or trying to learn different technologies. There's already plenty of that already going on. And actually by starting off slowly, actually we can just build up from there. We can actually start iterate and make things more accessible and make things more led by the community of practitioners. And the nature of the program, what we're hoping is quite brazenly cross-sector. So we are bringing in people from cultural sector, from libraries. We've got scientists, researchers, obviously third sector involved in the network as well. And that's part of the exciting aspect of it, but also appreciating that people have different shared languages, different shared needs. So trying to kind of start slowly and build up. A couple of notes and tips on the Facebook group themselves. As we've said, people are generally familiar with it, which is great. It's not ideal for everyone. Not everyone likes to use Facebook, which is absolutely fair enough. So we've provided some guidance in terms of how people can use official pages if they have access to an official page to download it, or even helping people make up kind of essentially not fake user, but making accounts only to be used for this purpose, which isn't dissimilar to setting up for a new platform anyway. We've made videos to try and make it more accessible and to highlight different things. One interesting tip for people who are thinking about doing Facebook groups is they've got something called a social learning group, and you can organize things into units, which I never knew beforehand, but actually it almost makes the group into a kind of an online course. So you can take any of the content, events, any posts or questions, any links, any videos, and you can organize them into units like chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. And you can even make some of them kind of compulsory, just to kind of obviously when it's a discussion, things can get lost very easily. So using units is actually a nice way of organizing things, and you can make sure that people, look at the rules, look at the introduction, introduce themselves, kind of give people that guidance, and that hopefully makes it an ongoing resource and almost depository of information. We've used the recommend function, which shows things onto a map, and that's a really nice way of building that sense of geographical, I guess, community as well, because it's a Scotland-wide network. So when people introduce themselves and say where they're from, that comes up on the map, which is quite nice. And in terms of what we're doing in terms of the work at the actual meetings, we're mixing it up between different formats as well. And again, that variety, seeing what works for different people and for different access needs. So we've got a live video very often with 2 or 3 different people from the network sharing kind of their experiences, and people can interact by typing. We've also got a text-based discussion, which is based on an event. So we have events specifically on a particular theme, and then on the discussion, I will post different questions as threads, and then people can answer in their own time on the discussion. And we do have a set time for that, but it does mean that people who miss it or prefer not to lose video or want to just catch up later on can actually just feed into the discussions going on, and it's kept as a resource afterwards. And we found that really useful. And then the main challenge with that is just notification fatigue. So we're very aware that with Facebook, you don't know how much information is getting conveyed to people because people aren't looking at notifications, or it gets lost in everyday things, which is absolutely fair enough. So maybe one of the challenges around that is trying we might be trying to get people's emails as well if they would like to. I'm looking at other ways like a Google Doc online, which I know SCVO uses quite a lot, to convey that information in different ways, so then that way we can capture people where they are. So I will probably leave it there. That's my 5 minutes. So any questions, let me know. And anyone's welcome to join the group as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lewis. There's been a few questions coming in the chat. So once we've heard from all the speakers, we'll get a chance to ask questions. You can put your questions in the chat box, or you can, when it comes to questions, but you can just stick your finger up. I'd also like to highlight the ridiculous. I've just realized that I'm writing with a child's pen. So I'm not a giant man. This is just a really small pen. Also, there's a happy birthday button behind me, which my children put up for our hamster's birthday. So there you go. Who knew you celebrate hamsters' birthdays? So there you go. I'm going to talk a wee bit. I'm probably not as useful as the rest of these speakers on the subject of building communities, but I thought I'd just chat a wee bit about kind of some of my experiences doing this. So I'm very old, so I've been working in the third sector for quite a long time. So some of you might remember a place online called Third Sector Forums, which at the time was the biggest charity forum in the UK. So that was something that I founded probably about, I don't know how many years now, maybe 12 years ago, I think it was. So it was quite a big online community, and obviously as that shift moved from traditional online forums to social media, a lot of the conversations shifted from there. So I'd probably like to bring in, I guess, some of the learning from that. We also got a WhatsApp group called Third Sector Geeks, which is specifically for people working in digital in the third sector, which is quite a thriving community. And I guess just that principle of community building is something that I've always tried to do in my own channels, whether it's a Twitter account or my LinkedIn account, is trying to do less about pushing content to people and more about how do you add value to people. I thought Lewis made a really good point about that kind of balance that you're always going to have to strike. And this came up on a call the other day about choosing a channel that's ubiquitous like Facebook or like WhatsApp versus your wish list of perfect things that you'd like to have from that channel. So whether it's about security or whether it's about functionality. So I guess for a lot of people at the moment, when we're talking about kind of more closed private communities during COVID, is using a tool like Telegram versus using something like WhatsApp, which is the most used app in the UK at the moment, and trying to convince your users to go and download Telegram and get their head around it and have space in their phone for yet another app is a very, very big ask when 97% of them will already have WhatsApp. So just thinking about that balance you're going to strike between something that's ubiquitous versus something that ticks that complete wish list of features. Something else Lewis picked up on, which I thought was quite important, is just this notion of going to where your audiences are already. So there's a danger in the third sector that, you know, we ought, and particularly at this time, that we're going to build yet another community. And actually, particularly the guys who are on the call from Edinburgh coronavirus support, a lot of the coronavirus groups that are doing really powerful stuff, it's not just about them setting up camp in a Facebook group or a WhatsApp group. It's about thinking about where do those local communities exist already. So a really small Facebook group in Kerstorf and then a larger one in Leith, and thinking about where are those communities across Edinburgh and how do we add value. And the same thing applies to you thematically. So if you're working for a health charity, there's probably a clunky closed Facebook group. There's probably 4 of them in the UK that have got 80,000 users for that exact health condition that your charity is working on. So always assume that that audience exists somewhere already and try and add value in that space before you go and just build something from scratch. yourselves. I think one of the things that we've tried to do with these DigiShift calls, so I guess two things, is we've tried to make these not just simply a webinar where people just talk at you, which I am doing just now, I'm conscious of that, but we're trying to make it more of a community. So we've got a lot of people on this call who have come for all the calls that we've ever had, and that's part of the reason that we're running these. So it's not just simply you sign up, you hear someone talk, and then you leave a Zoom call. The things that we've tied around this, we've tried to build community around it. So there's the podcast, some of the excellent blog content that the SCVO digital team are writing that's coming out of the learning from these Zoom calls. And also things like every single call generates a Google Doc. So we scoop up all the best practice and all the examples that come out of these calls, whether it's in the chat box or whether it's from the speakers. And then we basically give you a Google Doc that's got all the learning from each of these calls. So there's this amazing kind of resource that's kind of come off the back of these. So I'm going to shut up. And we're going to hear from Sam and Torben from Edinburgh Coronavirus Support. That is the correct term, isn't it? That's the correct name. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Cool, perfect. Right, I'll hand over to them. They'll talk a wee bit about what they've been doing in Edinburgh, which is pretty exciting.
Cool, thanks, Ross. And hello, everyone. So my name's Sam Buckley, and I'm just going to briefly explain who we are and what we do before I'll pass over to Torben to give you some of the insights and what we've learned from creating the community within Edinburgh. So we are a community resilience group. So we can naturally formed out of Facebook, which grew very quickly within a month to 9,000 members. And we've created a database of willing volunteers. So we share opportunities from local charities in need to them. And it also expanded onto a Slack group of graphic designers who wanted to create content for the group, ultimately led on to the website. And Torben may touch on like how we intersected our media and channels to kind of help grow and create clarity on the community. What we do is really, we facilitate community support within the Edinburgh area, and there's multiple actors in that, so it's not centralized control. We also share the opportunities to the databases, because those two things kind of grew in tandem in terms of our aims. So with that, I will hand over to Torben, who will share his insights. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Now, to a certain extent, I'm not, almost the thing is almost the wrong chat for me to be talking on here, because what you're talking about is building communities, whereas what we effectively did was rode a wave. We've learned a lot in that time, but a lot is very relatively new. We started up around about the 17th of March. So, like I say, whilst we've learned a lot in that time, I'm not sure I'm in a position to teach anyone. However, I'll try and be brief, and then if people have questions about things that I might be able to, explain about and speak more about, ping them in the questions, deal with it then. For now, I'm going to try and keep things relatively simple and just point out how we went about building the group. Well, I use that term, building. How the group came about. One of the things is that this group is not something that we constructed. People sort of have been sort of saying, oh, it's good stuff, you built some really good stuff here. And it's like, no, we didn't. It's not as if we're standing in front of a big building and saying, we constructed this. We're by an oak tree, which quite frankly, would probably have grown anyway. We simply provided a focal point for what fundamentally was probably what I almost call a proto-group that was already there. It started with the formation of the group as a response to a lot of discussions that were going on another group, which was the Meadows Share and Meadows Chat, which is sort of a large part of the student community based around the central part of Edinburgh. There were a lot of people talking. There was a clear sort of we want to do something vibe going on. And the thought was simply, okay, well, let's make a focal point where it can go rather than being a bunch of different discussions. That then exploded, so to speak, grew massively, and suddenly we had a community, and we were then faced with the requirement that we had to start making a whole bunch of choices, because going back to the oak tree metaphor, it grows itself, but at what point can you can help like shield the initial sapling, you can help provide it with some support, it then otherwise does its own thing, you can't control it. But we had to sort of see, okay, we are now in control of this, well, not in control, again, wrong wording. running this group, this platform, where this community is growing, that gives us a certain level of responsibility. How do we serve this community? And that resulted in us having to make a whole bunch of choices, largely based on what we thought the community wanted, our own personal values, and just trying to feed and give the community some sort of purpose. So like getting news in, things like that. But it was very much a sort of chaotic phase. And that was basically the creation phase, or I personally refer to as the ARG phase. Once those decisions have then been made and conscious choices to say, okay, we're trying to go for this, we've made these decisions, we then had to try and sort of formalize a lot of that structure that had sort of grown from the community. And that then led to us sort of deciding on sort of moderation and setting down some rules, actually giving the community some structures as well as just this drive. And as part of that, one moment, let me just quickly. And that part of that we then had to try and sort of understand and sort of clarify the focuses of the group. So it's basically almost feeding back what people have been telling us. And so, okay, this is what this group wants to do. This is what this community wants. Okay, this is what it's for. But then at that point, we started going, this is what we want to be doing. This is off brief. And that's the point where we start putting down limitations. So for example, people ranting about, oh, people are going out outside in quarantine, or we don't think the government's doing a good job, things like that. They're not really the purpose of the group. The purpose of the group is to try and achieve something, do things. And while we were lucky with our initial seed, as it were, going back to that metaphor, growing into something, those seeds work ways. Communities can coalesce around concepts, and if someone starts a sort of whole negative vibe about complaining about something, a group can quickly become a group about complaining about something. So we then sort of had to sort of set down these limitations, start defining what the group was wanting to be. But then when we do that, it's almost a second phase, a moderation phase after the creation phase, where we start having to sort of, again, control or streamline things a little bit. And then we end up getting is you get build up pressures. So what we then had was, okay, we're saying people can't do this, but some people definitely want to do this. So what we then either do was, if someone had a strong point, let them pursue them, like sort of delegate, okay, you, if you wanted to go off and do this, please, we'll encourage you, we'll help you. And like not stamp on things. And if that then merges, creates a new group, awesome. That can then be sort of synergized with the original group. We actually started setting up some subgroups. The one that's most effective at the moment is the local group directory. Because we started seeing these groups popping up, thought it was okay, useful for actually having a way of contacting them, people getting an overview. At the same time, having all the chatter from all these different groups and all the sort of different sort of local things on one place would have created a huge amount of noise. So we created a sort of local group directory where people could sort of sort things in under postcodes. And actually, we ended up using the units that Lewis mentioned to sort that and compartmentalize things. And from that, we then sort of created a few other things like mental health, accessibility and disability, and a whole bunch of offshoots that came from people coming up with good ideas, not core to the original group, but potential useful feed-ins, and then just sort of letting them branch off and letting it grow organically. Yeah, I'm basically trying to get everything to be effective. Now, part of that was, as I mentioned, delegation. We started getting on moderators. One of the early moderators was the person who suggested units, and it was a bit unfortunate for the poor girl because she suggested this brilliant idea, and we then went, that's great, how do you want to run a group? Which is a very much deer in the headlights moment for her, but fundamentally she showed competence, which is the first mistake. After that, once we started setting up these groups, we then also had to consider what things weren't working. So we did actually also set up as a news and information, the idea being that some of these satellite groups could feed into the main group. So it's like, what do we need? Well, here's news information. Let's chuck some people who have the basic qualifications in there, have them talk, and if something useful comes out of that, we can pull that into the main group. It didn't really self-perpetuate, so we kind of left it. It's still there, and if we need it later, that could be useful. Same for local group admins or organizers within Edinburgh. We set up a group so they could sort of join in and share information. Again, people were so busy in their local groups that yet another group just didn't quite get the traction. It's still there, but we just had to sort of accept that rather than trying to keep the thing artificially alive, as it were, time was better spent elsewhere, and sort of just accepting that, okay, that doesn't work, shedding that, moving on, was, I think, an important part of preventing the whole thing from getting bogged down. And once these sort of concepts and limits and things started developing in this sort of second phase, moderation phase, we then started getting an idea of the structure of what the whole group was. So now we actually have a general structure, and we started looking at well, the limitations of the platform itself. What are we trying to do? What is the purpose? And what are the weaknesses of, or the failings, shortcomings in what we're doing? So Facebook units, as mentioned before, really useful. Facebook by itself is not a very good it's not queryable. If you want to actually be able to reference something later on, I don't know if any else are on the Meadows share, but if someone posts a little a thing to share, you notice it, Facebook refreshes, it disappears. You can spend hours trailing down trying to find that one post earlier that day because so many new things have come on. And that is sort of the shortcoming of Facebook. You can't find the useful information that you need. You only see what's popular. So that's where the website then came from. We started trying to sort of organize and to streamline people so that people go, okay, they need this, well, you can find that there. You need this, you can find that there. That's what a website is good for. Sam came in, was around about the time we started doing the, looking at Twitter. And Twitter is really good for communications, is how we came to know about this, for example. Just more sort of inter-organizational stuff and general awareness. So we sort of started building up these different platforms, complementing each other, but also trying to avoid things overlapping. And that point, once you actually have that structure, which has grown, it's sort of almost the exact reverse from what's been described sort of a bit earlier with Ross, is that we're not starting with defining what we want and then tailoring something and then creating it. We started with the creation and then let it coalesce from there. Creation, more definition, and then finally getting to the point where we're starting to build up an identity. And so starting getting to a bit more sort of graphics, a bit more of what is the long-term purpose of this group, which is basically to coordinate and inform and connect. We're not organizing anyone. That fundamentally is a lot of cases the job of established charities. They know what they're doing. They've dealt with these communities before. As grassroots, what we can do is we can contribute. But anyone trying to sort of stand up and go, we're in control of this, it's, I don't want to say doomed to fail, but it's very large potential for overreach. It's far better that we try and feed in and connect the people who are doing a good job and who can synergize with each other. But yeah, so that's sort of the 3 points, as it were. Creation, moderation, and a bit more sort of, definition, and then lastly, image and almost sort of like the gestalt of what the organization, or the organization is possibly even a bit too strict a word, the group, the community actually is. So that's sort of my description of sort of what's happening and what's happened. If people have questions as to what we've learned from this, I mean, we started from absolutely zero, so quite a lot. Do feel free to put them forward and I'll try and answer as best I can. Conversely, if this is entirely irrelevant to the stuff that you're aiming on doing, focusing on a particular purpose, that's fine too. We're here to help. We're not here to...
So there's some questions been coming in the chat. So Sam's been very good actually trying to kind of keep up on those and answer some of those, but we're going to have, so we'll have the Q&A after we hear from Jen.
Brilliant.
And some others, particularly I think there's been a lot of questions came in previous Zoom calls that we've had around how the established charities work with a lot of informal groups that have sprung up in the communities, and some of those groups like you guys where you're really clear about, you know, we're not the experts and charities have been working some of these issues for years and we add value, versus, I guess, some of the other groups that have sprung up and kind of almost dismissed where kind of charities fit in that picture. And I think it's really refreshing to hear that you're working together with a lot of local third sector organisations. So that's really useful.
Yeah, I mean, to sort of the final point, one of the things we actually had very much from the beginning, because, well, honestly, when we started out, we had no idea what we were doing, but we also accepted we had no idea what we were doing. But the whole principle was, we were there, we had a job in front of us, we were doing the best that we could, but we also had to accept that if someone came along who was more experienced in what we were doing, then the best thing we could do would be to stand to one side. We actually started off as coronavirus volunteering Edinburgh. When we then started sort of working and sort of chatting with Volunteer Edinburgh, we sort of figured out, okay, no, these guys are better placed to do that. Took a step back, and then worked and trying to work sort of complementary to them. It's like we have a niche, we're trying to focus on that, but also understanding that everyone else has their niche and we shouldn't start encroaching into that. So yeah, being prepared to step aside in face of someone who is actually more experienced.
Yep, cool. Okay, so we'll pick up any questions that are coming on from people once we've heard from Jen. Just a couple of other things before I pass you over to her. So Beth is on the call. Beth has an amazing, I think it might be an African savanna potentially behind you, Beth. I don't know. Is it? Yeah, right. So Beth is looking for any feedback from you guys, and particularly around some of the content that we've got. So there's a new podcast that's been created that's coming out of these calls. There's a lot of blog content that's coming out. So we're looking for a small group of around about 5 people who might be able to spend a wee bit of time just reviewing our content. It wouldn't be anything onerous, but just to kind of chat with Beth. So if you're interested, if you ping Beth a private message in the chat, or you can send her an email. I'm going to try and get this email address right, Beth. If it's not the right one, shout at me. So it's digital@scvo.org.uk. Yep, perfect. So digital@scvo.org.uk. One of us will stick that in the chat as well. A couple other things. So these calls now happen twice a week. So we have a big Zoom call, which is the one you're on just now. So the theme today is around building communities. We have another one of these big Zoom calls on Tuesday, 2 p.m. next week. So that one is about digital leadership. You don't have to be in a leadership position in a charity to come along. So it's open to everyone. So we've got Zoe Amar is coming along to give some of her top tips in that call, which is amazing. We've also got, who else have we got? We've got Jackie Taylor from Lifelink, who is a Digital Senior Leaders Programme alumni, talking about some of the big changes they've made to their charity. Nathan Sparlin, who's been really kind of vocal in the kind of digital space during this period. And HIV Scotland have shifted pretty much all their support services to online channels. He's going to be talking about how they've done that and some of the decisions they took. And we've also got Pat Armstrong from ACOSVO, which for those of you who don't know it is the membership body for senior leaders within the charity sector in Scotland. And she's going to be reflecting on what some of their members are telling them. So what is the kind of common themes that are coming out from chief execs of charities across Scotland. So that's going to be a really useful call that we've got on Tuesday. All the links to these are going in the chat and the kind of links that Siobhan's been putting in. We've got one on Friday this week on crisis housing. So this is obviously a huge issue at the moment. That one is open to anyone who's working in a charity or a community group or a housing association where you're working with people who are experiencing issues with housing at the moment. We've got 4 really good speakers lined up from that, working in the homelessness sectors, people like organisations like Shelter Scotland and Govan Housing Association speaking on that one. And then the final one, which I'm going to plug, is next Friday's Zoom call, which is another thematic one. And that is specifically on refugees, asylum seekers, and communities where English is a second language. So we're going to be focusing specifically on those groups next Friday. Right, before I hand you over to Jen, I just wanted to pick up, because there's always someone who has an amazing background on these calls. And Claire Greer Monaghan, you are in like the most amazing shed I have ever seen. Can you give me a tour of your shed? Is that possible? Can we get like a webcam tour of your shed? Go on. Excellent, right. Whoa, look at that place. Is that a Hibs shirt? That's amazing. Look at that. I don't have a shed like that. I've got like shed envy.
Oof.
Look at that thing. It's amazing.
Look at that.
Incredible, isn't it?
Oh, wow.
Maddie, do you want that shed as well?
Uh-huh.
Good, eh? It's really cool. It's got green lights and everything. Look at that.
Suddenly we lose all the jambos from the call.
I know. Yeah, I'm a Dunfermline fan. I have no affiliation to Hibernian Football Club. It's just an impressive shed. That's all I was taken by in that. Right, so I'm going to hand you over to Jen Rankine now. So Jen came and spoke to one of our senior leaders programs that we run through SCVO. I think it was a couple of years ago, maybe now.
It's a while.
It was a while ago, yeah. So Jen is the Global Senior Community Manager for Skyscanner. So Skyscanner, for those of you who don't know, is, I'm going to really badly explain what Skyscanner is. I don't know even why I started that sentence. Like,
I'm curious.
Skyscanner, as you know, is, and then I had a brain freeze as to what Skyscanner is. A website that gathers up really nice travel deals and flight deals in a single space kind of search engine.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
So I brought Jen the call because Jen's, in my mind, always been really good at explaining in simple terms what community management is and offering advice to other people and being really open about that stuff. Skyscanner, their channels, so like their Twitter account, multiple global Twitter accounts, Instagram accounts into the hundreds of thousands. The main Facebook page has over 10 million likes on it. So we're talking about, fairly vast global communities, but that ability that Jen's got, no pressure Jen, to distill down what is global community management and it's stuff that's relevant to everyone. So take it away.
Oh, that's quite the introduction. Thank you. I'm not in a shed either. I don't have anything exciting. There might be a cat that appears. I'm sorry. They get hangry about 12 o'clock, so they might appear. So yeah, hi, I'm Jen. I look after pretty much everything when it comes to community at Skyscanner. I guess to start as well, I've been doing this for about 7 or 8 years now. Originally, I actually started on Neopets, which, if anyone remembers that, or MSN chat rooms, which I did as a hobby as a kid. Never thought it would become a job, but here we are. So yeah, Neopets was a fun part of my memories of my career, unknowingly. So community is massively important to me, mainly because it's the way for people to engage with a brand. It's that one-on-one connection that a lot of people really, really crave. And given that people are feeling quite isolated right now, it means that they have a way to have conversations with people. It means they can get things sorted. It just gives them that lifeline that they've perhaps been looking for, that they maybe never haven't had before. And I'll always praise one brand in particular because they made it interesting, and that is Monzo. So if you're looking for a brand that made a community for a really, really boring product, Monzo is your company. And they do some really interesting stuff. They have online forums and everything where basically there's so much information on there, and everyone's so willing to help. It's quite fascinating. So my first thing is, unless you have managed to stumble on something amazing, is it does take time. And obviously there's some exceptions to that, where Torben was mentioning, it does just spring up, and there is other things where they can appear overnight, and if you're very lucky to have that, then more power to you. But they can take a lot of time to build. For example, most forums can take about 3 years to reach maturity, so it's one of these very, very long term plans. I would also highly recommend having a dedicated resource onto this, because it can become quite disheartening when you start trying to build a community and it's not instant. So it's almost like having someone there to keep the conversation flowing and to answer all of these questions and making sure people are talking back as well. And one thing that we've done actually is we've started with a very small group of people. Off of Facebook and everything. We have a private forum, which is only for what we deem as super users. Now, these are people who use our app daily. They don't necessarily do anything on it, but they're just on there, like having a wee look. They get really nosy. They just want to see what's out there. And we brought them into like a private community forum, which lets them have conversations with our product managers, with myself if they want to have a natter, and it lets us actually get direct feedback from them, and they feel more empowered because the product is developing because of them, essentially. And that's one thing that's really quite powerful, and it means if you start with the smaller base, that they end up becoming your loyal ambassadors, and in most cases also become your moderators. They end up, they're so ingrained in the brand that they want to help you out, and you can reward them however you see fit as well. They're usually pretty open to helping out as and when you need. Second one is content. it is really, really vital to kind of keep it interesting. And you don't necessarily have to just keep sharing stuff because you haven't spoken that day. It has to be relevant to whatever you are doing on there. And I'd also highly recommend listening to what your community actually wants and what they're telling you. You don't have to invest in listening tools because I know they're very expensive and out of a lot of people's budgets, but you can just pay attention to what's going on. There's a lot of conversations happening naturally and organically that you can listen into and either create content around, or you can start conversations organically within these channels. And in a lot of cases, they're already doing it for you. They're already starting these conversations. It's just getting involved with them as well. I'd also, in that, make sure that whatever you're talking about in your community is kind of related to whatever you're doing. I know that sounds quite basic, but we've seen quite a lot in the past where people they want to create communities because it's the cool thing to do. And they don't necessarily have a purpose. So it's like you have to make sure you have a common goal, and that whatever you're trying to achieve with this community actually adds value back to them. Whether, if you have a look on Facebook, for example, there's so many travel groups. And if we were to then spring up and go, hey, look, it's us. We need to really figure out what our main value would be within that. That could be deals, for example, for us, or it could be finding new people to travel around the world with, not right now, but maybe in the future. So it's always really helpful to have, and it means that your community will grow quite organically as well, because the people who are there all have one interest and they have one common goal. My third one is, I know this is going to sound really silly, but be a human. It is something that I pretty much every single thing that I speak to is about being your authentic self when it comes to chatting to communities. We do tend to find that the minute someone sees a brand logo, they don't want to engage. They feel like they're being spoken to by a corporation and not the person behind it. And in a lot of the conversations that I perhaps have on like Facebook, for example, where I can't escape having a logo next to my name, is actually just simple things as signing off as who you are. And that way they actually have the ability to figure out who they're speaking to. And if that problem does arise again, for example, they can go, well, I was speaking to Jen, she said this, and then we can normally fix it and solve it for them. But for like closed Facebook groups or forums, I would highly recommend actually using a personal kind of account for these perspectives. Or it doesn't have to be your personal one, it can be just another one you've made up if you don't feel comfortable with that. But people will naturally respond better to humans than they will to logos, is what I found over the years. With that in mind as well, it's very, very easy to fall into corporate talk. It's one of the things whenever we bring on someone new is that it takes a while for people to get used to not necessarily going default to mumbo jumbo or acronyms or industry terms that people don't necessarily understand. For example, one in the travel industry is OTA, which is online travel agency. And you see a lot of people mentioning that, and people responding back are going, I don't know what this is. So it is very much just speaking to people like they are actually humans, which is usually a good thing. And being really honest and transparent in your messaging. People can see through anything that you're trying to like wrap up in PR speak or trying to make it sound too complicated for what it actually is. And people will respect you a lot more within the communities for being honest and upfront. Obviously, if it's a legal thing, don't go breaking laws and giving away all your company secrets, but it's very much a case of be honest with people, and if you can't say it, just tell them. In most cases, they'll actually be okay with it. And I also kind of wanted to touch on like the places that you could be in terms of community. It doesn't have to cost a fortune. I know there's a lot of tools out there. There is forums that charities can get discounts on as well, as long as you can prove you're a charity. There's so many free options, like Facebook group has been mentioned multiple times in here, but there's Slack, there's Discord, there's a whole bunch of different options that you can take advantage of for absolutely free. the one thing I will caveat that with is make sure that it is the right choice for your brand and your community. These will be long-term commitments normally, and they do have downfalls, and but they do also have upsides. It's already been kind of mentioned that Facebook groups are readily accessible, but in the younger generations there is a reluctance to be on Facebook these days. They don't necessarily want to be there. It's also, you're at the discrepancy of whatever Mark Zuckerberg decides to do that day, so you kind of have to keep that in mind as well. If you choose to go for forums, there's a higher barrier to entry. You need to get people to sign up, but you also have the SEO rankings. So it's just trying to weigh up which one is more important to you, but obviously not spending too much time going into the nitty gritties of these things. And I think that was pretty much all I had. I think I've also massively gone over my 5 minutes. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Don't be daft. No, that was really yeah, and just I guess some of the simple rules in inverted commas that apply whether you're managing a page with 10 million people or you're just starting from scratch in terms of this stuff. So it's simple things like being human, which is a really obvious thing, but the thing that I've tried to kind of been telling charities for the last 10 years is hiding behind the kind of corporate logo and 5 of you managing a Twitter account and deciding in which corporate voice you will collectively speak is kind of ridiculous. And it's like, how do we move beyond that so that we're connecting with actual people? I particularly like, that point about doing one thing really well and then thinking where you go from there. And I think particularly in communities like Instagram, is nobody follows an Instagram account because one day they want a photograph of a chief exec speaking at a lectern, the next day they want a human story, the next day they want a photo of a dog in the office, the next day they want something else. People follow those accounts because they want an account that does one thing really well, and that's fundamentally it. So I think, and that's a kind of rule that everyone in this call should really be applying, is actually less is more. Don't set up 5 communities and try and spin 7 different plates in each of those communities. Is set up shop somewhere where your audience is and just do something effective that's going to add value to that audience. So I thought it was really useful, Jen. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions coming as well. Maddie, is there anything you want to kind of bring in, or any thoughts or any points from SCVO or?
Yeah, there was some of the key themes that were coming out were things that I think we've all said before, but not necessarily do in our own behaviours. So that idea around if something already exists, don't make something new, find out what's already there. I think all of our speakers have said that. So just to reiterate that, have a look first before we kind of go bowling in, kind of 2 feet first into let's make it new. And again, just to reiterate what you said, Ross, about where are the people that the community is? So where are they already? And to use the platforms that they're already on, as opposed to making something, again, brand new, and not to kind of necessarily get sidelined. I think that's one of the things for me as somebody who really likes tech and digital. I love the next new tool. I love the next new exciting platform that everybody's using. That's not everybody, that's me. So having to remember that what I might like to use is not actually what the rest of the world might like to use, and bearing that in mind, I think, when we're going forward and we're talking about building communities, it's about the community. It's not about us, it's about the community.
Yeah, and to be honest, like sometimes digital people are the worst for that. So there's a digital person sitting in a charity who goes, Telegram's the thing we should use because like young dads will definitely use a Telegram account. And then the chief exec's like, I have no idea what the difference is between Telegram or Instagram or any of the other channels that we have. You just do what you need to do. And then they set up camp on some obscure open source platform, which is great in theory, but then get surprised why nobody uses it. So there's always that balance to be struck. But that ultimate test of where is your audience already? How do you go into those spaces? Okay. Is there, Siobhan or Jen, have you noticed any questions for any of the speakers that have come out that have kind of leapt out at you from chat, and then we'll bring people in from the kind of video?
So kind of theme that quite a few people are talking about is just how people are funding the extra resources that are required for this process. So that's in terms of tech, the platform, or the staff time.
Oh, okay. So Skyscanner just has tons of cash, so that probably answers your question. I'll just speak
travel
for
right
now. Aye, that's a good point. Yeah, valid point. Yeah, okay. Used to have tons of cash.
We do have entire social teams, so we are pretty well resourced. So I'm probably not the best person to answer this one.
What about, I mean, Lewis and Sam and Torben? I mean, so Sam and Torben, you're obviously starting from scratch and you're not part of a kind of a structure at the moment, i.e. there's not an established charity behind it. So for you two, I think, Sam, you picked up on some of this stuff, just how cheap some of it could be. I don't know if you want to kind of come in on that.
And absolutely, if you can specify the question again, just to kind of...
Yeah, just, I guess, kind of like the kind of cost and resource that you've kind of put behind this. So I think you mentioned about something about hosting or setting up your kind of makeshift website in the chat. I spotted that.
Yeah, I suppose it really depends on your community and what you're trying to address. With us, we had a swell of very competent people self-presenting, and like we have a Slack group of graphic designers. There was healthcare professionals want to jump in, so we didn't really have to pay for website design costs. We have a guy who is a website analyst, and what he does is he does coding and he's all about accessibility. So we have a guy who makes sure that our website is accessible to other people, which is going to become a legal requirement soon anyway. So yeah, it's really been how you can actually harness the community, and if you can make an engaging community, then I'm sure they will contribute towards it. The very real cost was that if we wanted to get these things, we had to pay for the Wix upgrade. In that way, that was a real cost, but it's quite cheap. You know, if you split it amongst a group of people and they are engaged in that community, they'll fork out. And so Torben, myself, and two of our graphic designers, we chipped in for that. Again, I think it's really, for us, it's been quite nice because we're harnessing what's already there, but it depends on your community and what you're trying to do, if there's any costs incurred there.
Yeah. Okay. Lewis, anything from your organisation?
Yeah, I think for us, it's the biggest cost is time, I would say, personally, especially if you want it to be iterative and develop that framework and then let people develop it as further. I think it's as other speakers have said, is being not pushing too much, but also providing enough support so that, you can moderate things, you can provide that accessibility. Agree with so if our group is particularly on Facebook, so some of the main costs, really, the only thing I would recommend are things like, I've got graphic design skills, but if you don't have that, definitely investing in that so you've got a clearer brand. It is definitely worth investing in, different webcams and better microphones, for example, for those types of things as well. Because again, if you are relying on connection and Facebook Live or any of those type of things, again, it is worth having that. Now, trying to get one during the COVID crisis when everyone's thinking the same is a different matter of fish. But yes, eBay is your friend probably for that. But time, that's the main thing.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Yeah, and I guess tied into that, because I guess one of the things that I've seen kind of happen time and time again is charities try and default to often the lowest paid person in the organisation, or sometimes the youngest person in the organisation, because like these are digital natives and therefore they will know what to do, and then almost kind of putting responsibility in that person to communicate on behalf of what can sometimes be quite sizable organisations. So for me, it's about, even if your chief executive trustees are never going to get involved in the nitty-gritty of what this looks like, they need to have an understanding of why you're doing it and to sense check it and to safeguard. Because what happens time and time again is it's left with a junior member of staff who often can't make a lot of the right calls, and stuff can go wrong because of that. Or sometimes actually what usually happens is people default to really dull, safe content because they're in a junior position. They don't quite know what they should be talking about or shouldn't be talking about, and it becomes very kind of corporate one-way traffic that's just been pushed out to people, the same crap being rolled out day after day. So there needs to be that buy-in from the top, and even if it's just about strategic direction, but someone needs to take ownership of that and understand kind of what that looks like. So I thought that's a really good point, Lewis. Okay, any other questions? Anyone want to jump in from Zoom? So if you want to stick
Hang on.
Oh,
sorry, Ross.
Yeah,
I was there's a question from Jess Glenider. So Jess, I think, are you from Evoke? Around if you find that your community is in different spaces, what's a good next step? So I think that would be quite appropriate for a few folks. So if you've got lots of communities all in different spaces, I guess, how do you bring them together?
And can I just add to that question, because I think it's relevant. It's also, when you are then jumping into those conversations, how do you do it without it making it look like you're kind of piggybacking and overtaking the conversations?
Yeah, okay. So that's an interesting one. Jen, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that, particularly that, I guess, that point of piggybacking and not feeling like you're just the kind of corporate entity that jumps into people's chats. How does that work?
It's hard. it is, especially that's when if you have a logo behind you, it can be really tricky to jump in and not sound like you're just here for the sake of it. And every now and then you might see the meme kicking around. It's like Silence Brand, and it's that spider with the laser eyes. If you get that, something's gone wrong. So for something like this, it's honestly just read the room. If you don't see yourself adding any extra value to this conversation, perhaps just stay out of it. It really needs to feel like you're adding something. Otherwise, you will just feel like you are just being there for the sake of talking. And it can usually turn people against you, especially if you're like replying to stuff on Twitter, for example, that doesn't mention you directly. It can look a little creepy. If you just suddenly appear and you're like, hello, because we monitor for a whole bunch of different words, right? We monitor for like Skyscanner because people think they're hilarious, or Skyscanner and things like that. And then when you suddenly appear, they're a bit like, ah, cool, you're monitoring for us. So yeah, it's just very much a case of kind of keeping an eye on what it is and making sure that you actually have something good to say.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Yeah, and Lewis has just kind of added something in chat. My children are handing me mail. This is good. Excellent service during the call. There we go. Thank you. So Lewis made a really good point there about being generous with your time and attention, so giving more than you take. And again, I think that's just a really good principle to apply to building those relationships online. In terms of that monitoring stuff, so when when someone from Skyscanner talks about that and other people are like, well, that's good because you're Skyscanner, there's lots of simple free ways of doing this stuff. So on a free Hootsuite account, for example, you can set up a stream to monitor not just your brand mentions, but also thematic mentions. So if you work in a specific, say you work on a charity that's working a specific health condition, anytime someone mentions that health condition and they live in Scotland, you can set up a stream on your free Hootsuite dashboard that's going to bring those mentions in from multiple channels. So that, again, that notion of how do we spin those plates of potentially engaging on Twitter and Instagram and LinkedIn and on Facebook is actually a free tool like Hootsuite can help you do that really simply. And there's loads of other brand monitoring tools out there, but just it doesn't always need to be kind of expensive. Okay, any questions? If anyone wants to ask one and just kind of jump in, do you want to just stick your finger up and we can choose you? I have to go through 6 screens here, so like bear with me if I can't actually see you. Someone must have a question. Sure.
I wonder if we could just say a little bit more about platform choices and maybe that wider question about how long do you persevere with something, or when do you say, right, this is maybe not a very productive
That's
conversation.
A really good question. Yeah. Anyone got any thoughts on that one? Torben, you want to jump in on that one?
Facebook was the initial choice for us, but so platform-wise, what we ended up doing is actually treating it almost like radio, in that every single person that reshares is basically relaying a radio message, but it disappears into the ether so very quickly. So it's good for that, but like, again, mentioning the whole lack of access to information, that's when we sort of went, okay, Facebook can do that. It can be radio. It's not a directory. We tried that with the directory group. It worked reasonably well, but websites, things like that, are a good additional thing to jump to. And it very much depends on what is the thing that you need to do core, and is it then going to add something to the original group? If it adds something to the original group, chances are you can port people across to the new thing. So referencing the website was really quite useful. But if it's not adding something to the original group, then maybe the original group is doing it well enough. So there's that sort of thing of like, yeah, let's not try and spread yourself too much. Your spinning plates analogy is great. So yeah, it's sort of understanding sort of whether or not this new thing that you want to do is useful enough that you can actually get your community to join in on it.
I think there's also something in there about units that Lewis picked up on that we've also noticed. Torben kind of set up with Magdalena the units in the main group for interest things like entertainment, volunteer opportunities, that sort of stuff. And it was actually units in that perspective were quite hard, and people weren't familiar with it and weren't really using it. But like Lewis alluded to, in the directory, units became very useful because they had a purpose and people understood it. So we had poster groups for our various community resilience groups in localized areas. However, and like Lewis maybe used it, you know, for different training bits, people knew it, understood the purpose. So units, I think, can be a double-edged sword, I suppose, within a platform.
It's, I mean, a point worth mentioning relating to the units. We had a large amount of problem with people understanding the units in the directory as well, until we realized that you can set it so that the unit screen is a default drop-in on Facebook rather than the discussion. And suddenly everyone understood and all their problems disappeared.
Okay, that's really useful. Bex, you had a point on the chat there. I don't know if you want to jump in and just kind of talk about that.
Me, Bex.
Yeah, you, Bex, yeah.
I never get to speak on these things. Hi, everyone.
Okay,
I just help with the podcast, so I just sit here typing the whole time. But I do run quite a few communities, and I also work with charities to help them develop their communities too. And I am noticing a trend. Any other community professionals here want to jump in, but I think actually we talk about going to the audience a lot, and I still agree with that. But I also think actually, I think we are starting to move away from kind of mass communication. So where everybody used to use Twitter because that's kind of like an open tool, and you're happy to like just broadcast to whoever's there. I think humans are moving away from that and moving towards more niche, like WhatsApp groups of communities. So they're like developing their own niche closed communities now. I think this is a trend within the general population. So actually, where before I used to say never build your own forum, it's too much hard work, I actually think maybe we're moving towards a point where that's coming back now, where actually there is maybe a benefit to that. And especially if we're working with groups that might need moderation, it can be a really, really valuable resource. I do, want to add to that. I think it's been quite clear during this call that can be really difficult, and you do need a lot of resource to manage that. But if you're aware of that, it can be a great thing to do. I'm just noticing that kind of trend. But also, if you are running multiple centres maybe, or you have different local organisations within your bigger organisation, devolve control of your communities to them. Don't be frightened of doing that. And it is really scary, but you can put things into place to make it less scary, like training, etc. But what they're going to do is be able to make a better community in their local area. They will know the people to talk to. They will know the local niche. So yeah, don't be frightened of like devolving control. And finally, my final kind of community thing is you're never going to find a platform that everybody's happy with. You're going to suggest Facebook, and I'm going to grimace because I'm not on Facebook. I'd rather Slack, but you're never going to make everybody happy. So don't worry about that too much. I think we spend a lot of time trying to think about what platform to be on instead of just building a community for humans. That's it. I'm done.
That's really good advice. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we're seeing more of these micro communities spring up, and it's less about that kind of big numbers game and more about really quality small communities of people and what that looks like. I think, just as a kind of word of warning, I think what we're seeing a lot in the charity sector over the last few years is people trying to sell community platforms to charities, which can often be quite expensive solutions. Generally default to free. There will be a free option. The time and the money should be spent on, if you're going to spend £5,000 on a cheap, clunky forum that nobody's ever going to sign up for, you'd be better spending that £5,000 on a freelancer or adding on some time to a part-time worker's job to be your community manager. That'd be a much more effective way to spend that money, buying the platform or the tool. So just, I guess, just keeping that in mind. So some really good advice there. Okay, any other ones, Jen or Siobhan, that are coming in from the chat, either as a question or kind of points that people have made? Nothing. The chat's rolling over really quickly. There's some interesting stuff in there.
Just really to reiterate the question that Maddie had asked earlier, and that was if your communities across lots of different platforms, how do you best pull them together? So yes, we've talked about existing communities and using them, but what if they're already quite dispersed themselves?
Oh, I don't know. Jess, do you want to come in and kind of give clarity on the question? Because I'm not sure I totally follow the question. And everyone can see your good bookcase as well. Jess, are you still on the call?
I think Jess had to leave.
Maybe she's on another platform. But right, I guess one way to but the question is, like, say you're a charity and you've got some people you're in touch with on WhatsApp, but other people are looking at your Facebook page, and you know you've not got one place where the whole audience is. It's that question about how do you decide where to focus your attention? Is that a fair summary, do you think?
I think it might be something we could speak to, because obviously it was quite organic and grew out the Facebook group, and then we realised we've got volunteer sort of aspects, so we should be on Twitter, and we had Slack and that stuff. So the website for us was really that central point. And on our website, you can see a lot of it is actually just extraction from the other channels on there. You know, there's like a central point, so it's kind of a guide to people wanting to find things easily and create the clarity, because like you're saying, post gets lost, people on different platforms not understanding. So I find like intersecting the digital channels via website in our case was probably the easiest solution.
Yeah, it's really good advice. Jen, I don't know if you've got anything you want to add on that one.
I guess it really depends on the kind of the volumes that are coming through from each of these individual communities. Realistically, if that's where they are, that's probably where they want to be. And if you have got the resources or time to be able to support them on multiple communities, then I'd probably recommend doing that. Mainly because if you start, like, we notice it on social as well, if you try and take someone from Twitter to Facebook or the other way around, they don't like it. They tend to choose the platform that they either feel most at home about, they have privacy concerns are not there, all of these other fun things. It would really depend. It'd be a case-by-case situation, I would say, for something like that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's a real danger that, you know, when we're managing these communities, we want people to just act the way that we want them to act. So
yeah,
it's good if that person just did this thing and used this tool in this way. It's like, well, that's not how people use the internet. So it's just, for me, it's like thinking about, you know, if you spread yourself too thinly, maybe it's time to pull back in some of those channels. So if it's starting to feel overwhelming and you've got 6 channels and only 2 of them are adding value, maybe it's time that those other 4 need to go, or that you spend less time on those other 4. Because there's a real danger, particularly in the charity sector. You know, Facebook is now, correct me if I'm wrong here, Jen, is it what, 15 years old now? Or maybe
yeah, it's old.
Yeah. So these are not new platforms, and you might have inherited that from a previous member of staff. So that platform might be 9 years old in your charity. Now, there's that thing of, well, we've had this for 9 years, it's got 2,000 people on it, we need to just keep it going and feeding the beast with stuff, and you've no budget for Facebook ads. And actually all that happens is you're laboriously posting a piece of content every day, and it's just going into the ether, and maybe 4 or 5 people are seeing it because the algorithm's pushing it to the bottom, and actually it's maybe time to let some of those communities go. And that's a difficult decision to make, but where you've got very, very limited resource, you need to use it wisely, not just we set up another platform and then we spread ourselves even more thinly across even more channels.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same with, like, there's so much people right now, for in my industry anyway, are talking about TikTok. They're like, why are you not on there? And like, we can't manage the channels that we have, let's not have another one. And if I think Bex mentioned earlier on about having devolved powers, if that community is still very much alive, and it's obviously not like a branded account, it's like an actual community, if there's someone in there that wants to keep it going, you could potentially let them keep it going and see what happens with it. But yeah, sometimes you just got to let things die, and it's hard, especially if you've spent so long building it up. But if things are working against you, and you don't have much time, you should really just focus it on the places that you can keep alive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One thing just to kind of add in this, where you've got limited resource, or where there might be a danger that you're encroaching in a community that isn't fit for you. So that really good example there, Jen, of TikTok. So I ran a session with Young Scott recently, and we had a panel of young people at the session, and one of the big things that came back from them was TikTok is a space for young people. We do not want a charity bursting into that space and suddenly talking like charities talk, or treating TikTok the same way that you treat your Twitter account or your Facebook account. And within that is just thinking about, well, who do you need to partner up with? So Police Scotland ran a really difficult campaign on Snapchat about child grooming. So it was aimed at high school age children. And it was basically, they piggybacked on Young Scott's Snapchat account. So rather than Police Scotland setting up a Snapchat account where no 14-year-old ever wants to add Police Scotland on Snapchat, they used the fact that Young Scott have this massive engaged community on Snapchat, because they give away things like discounts and rewards if you sign up for it. So loads of young people are engaged. And that campaign basically was a story that they did with an Edinburgh school. And it was like once an hour over a 48-hour period, you basically saw a young woman meeting an older guy. And then this transpired over that 48-hour period. But it was police messaging going out via a Young Scot account and working in tandem with them to better understand that audience. So again, when we're thinking about how do you engage with communities, it's not like you need to go and jump in and build engagement with that community from scratch. If someone already has good engagement with them, how do you work with them and how do you add value in that space? Okay, there are 14 chat messages since I started waffling on. So is there anything interesting in there that anyone from SCVO has spotted that you want to pull out?
It's maybe just to flag, there's been some interesting questions and answers about Facebook advertising. So whether, how much it costs and whether it's worth a spend. I wonder, Lewis, if you wanted to expand a wee bit more on that.
Sure. It's not something we're using for our particular online community, but when we've had it for charity events or things like that beforehand or whatever events, we have found it to be quite effective. But what Fiona has just said I think is a good point as well about, it is a skill. It's about working out how to phrase things. One of the best tips I heard about it was actually thinking about micro-targeting. So it's a wee bit creepy, but then thinking about actually, rather than putting, let's say, even £10 can be effective, but if you wanted to put a £30, say, rather than just doing it in one campaign, what you could do is split that up into 3 £10 campaigns, and with each one having a slightly different target. So for example, if your event is about, I don't know, raising money for a particular condition, or if you're looking at particular gender, for example, then you can actually look at different groups or different geographies for the £10 for, and see which one actually is getting the better value, if you like, and then investing a wee bit more than that if you'd like to play that game. Not everyone does, but it can be quite effective. And I personally, obviously not everyone likes to use prints. Some people only use prints, so that the offline is important as well. But if you're working with kind of younger, middle-aged audiences, then actually I generally find it's more effective than printing off posters.
So really good advice there. Yeah, I just put in a link there quickly. I'm going to bring in Ali from Be More Human because he's going to kind of pick up on Jen's point about actually being a human and using that as a way of building communities, which sounds kind of obvious, but lots of people don't do it. It's just remarketing. I don't know if many people have used it, but it just is so underused in the charity sector. But just that notion of someone is interested in your 10K event, not that anyone's going to be doing a 10K event anytime soon, but let's say you've got a 10K event on your charity and you want to get sign-ups for your fundraising event, and I've gone on that and I filled out part of your form, and then I got distracted and started making my dinner and I didn't complete the form. That is the hottest opportunity you're going to have to convert someone who's going to sign up for an event. Now, remarketing to that person so that they get an ad for that 4 hours later on Facebook or the next day on Facebook is much more likely to yield a conversion, whether that's volunteering or fundraising or someone self-referring a service. The difference between that and simply saying, well, lots of women aged 25 to 45 kind of like our service and they all live in Glasgow, let's just target all of them. That is a colossal spend versus a really small spend that's going to yield a conversion. And it's just trying to get into that mindset, and it just requires a tiny bit more thought into your Facebook ads, but it's very, very easy to give Facebook a lot of money very, very quickly, and you're essentially chucking it out the window. It's just that tiny bit of extra thought can yield much, much bigger results. Ali, do you want to quickly jump in? You want to kind of talk about being more human in terms of communications?
Yeah, thanks, Ross. I guess, my one bit of advice is don't overcomplicate it. This whole idea of showing up and finding your authentic voice or whatever, don't complicate it. Communities run on relationships. All of us form relationships naturally as human beings. So in times of uncertainty like we're in just now, we generally gravitate towards those that are showing leadership. So in uncertain times, we are drawn to that. So if you've got, a set of experience in whatever your organisation does, you have knowledge and an experience around that, showing up and it's just simply giving your opinion on that, rather than the kind of stale corporate line that's really manicured, with an announcement that's left. Like Lewis said, that, don't let perfect get in the way of good. Get it out there. Humans respond to humans. So if it is a bit rough around the edges, that's all right, because, we're all rough around the edges at bits. So, yeah, that's it. And just it's that last bit. I think just we respond to that humanity when we see it, and it's not because it's like a kind of an intellectual thing that we go, oh, you know, there's a good bit of messaging that I want to respond to. It's natural. It's in us all. So just don't overthink it. But just a little underlining bit on the end there said, also don't overpromise. So don't get drawn or seduced into, you know, kind of linking two things together if you don't know that they actually do link together or whatever. Use your experience that you've built around whatever it is your organisation does or where your areas of expertise are, and give your perspective on that, and then ask open questions to bring others in to that.
Yeah, that's really good advice, Ali. Thank you for that. It's really useful. I was going to bring in another point there, and then I had total mind blank, and this happens a lot during COVID. I can't actually remember very much. I also can't remember very much because I chopped off the top of my thumb last night, which is a really nice thing. I know everyone really wants to see that as Zoom call, don't they? So that's lovely. Ali's face is like, that's disgusting. That's good. Yeah,
it's rough around the edges, and then there's rough around the edges.
Oh, well, I had another plaster on it, and then it just completely bled through, and this is the only plaster I have left. I'm not going to go near a hospital at this point in time. There's not a chance. So if like the top of my finger's just hanging off, then it's just hanging off. That's just how it is. All the calls aren't usually this gruesome, by the way. I'm just pointing out this is a one-off. Bex has said OMG in the chat there. That's good. Thanks for your feedback. Yeah, I think Ali's made a really good point there about charities kind of stepping up, and particularly where you have expertise in a specific area, is people need that more than ever, and particularly where they can't access face-to-face services. And for some organisations where helplines have gone down, where they don't have VoIP systems, that connection that they're going to have with you as a human online is more important now than it has ever been. And whether that's through live chat, or whether it's through the closed Facebook group that you run, or whether it's your chief exec being really present, talking about the issues that affect the beneficiaries you work with, that human side of things is arguably more important now than it's ever been. Anything that Maddie, John, Siobhan's got her finger up. Siobhan, do you want to kind of jump in?
So yeah, just to add to what you were just saying about being human, that's kind of one of the big themes that's come out of today. And Fiona Haig's put in a really good point in the chat that some of the best interaction she's ever seen is when someone, be that a leader or an expert that's highly respected, has kind of got down and dirty and admitted that they've messed up. They've posted outtakes or like said what they're struggling with just now, and that things are difficult, even for the experts just now. Yeah.
And I think, and that kind of ties into that point that Ali made, is like, the point of you being here is not to have all the answers. So part of it might be, you know, you might be an expert, but actually part of it is asking questions again. And again, that sounds really bloody obvious, but even if you do it shamelessly just to build engagement, it's like, engaging content is not one-way traffic where you tell someone, I know 100% of the things, here's everything you need to know. Engaging content is admitting that you know 90% of it, and 10% is going to come through that community of their own shared experiences. And particularly where you've got communities of people who will have lived experiences, particularly for a lot of the charities that are on this call, is there's often more value to them sharing their experiences than you as a single expert going on and telling people all the things that they should know about X, Y, and Z topics. So just thinking about how do you build that expertise within your community and bring that to the surface as well. Okay, any resources, Maddie or John, that you want to, John's actually on another call now, isn't he? So Maddie, Siobhan or Beth, any kind of resources or things that you want to signpost to before we kind of wrap up?
I think just to remind people that there is the Google Doc there, which both Jen and Siobhan have been working on and tidying up, and it's about just taking the time, get a cup of tea. We're all really busy. Beth Cantor on last week's call was just to even take a minute just to have a look and just to give ourselves that space to be able to, I know, sorry, Lewis is going, yeah, the finger dancing. There was that idea about just sit with a cup of tea, have a look through it. Things are coming really fast for us all right now, so take a breath, reflect, and just look at that Google Doc, because it has so many resources in it that people are asking questions that have been asked before, and the answers to most of it, not everything obviously, but a lot of that is there. So take the time And I think final point from me is reflecting on what all the speakers have said, and the questions that have been asked, and then other people who have kind of chipped in, is that idea about taking time to reflect. When we're building communities and online communities, I think all our speakers have mentioned that idea around what is the purpose, what is it we're trying to do, and that might shift, and that's okay. It's just about taking that time to look back, do a kind of a bit of a retrospective, what's working, what's not, what do we need to ditch? And I think that was Jen's point, which was really well. If it's not working, it's not working, let it go. And in our sector, we're not necessarily good at that. Just let it go, try something else, and then take it from there. And remembering that it's all about people. Doesn't matter where that community is, it's all about people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, some really, really good advice there. Yeah, the Google Doc, which has been mentioned, there's a link in the chat, so you can copy and paste. The Zoom chats are not very good at generating URLs. I've no idea why, but it's a weird thing. So if you just copy and paste that and then stick it in your browser, you'll get access to that Google document. So a lot of the stuff, as Maddie said, has been picked up in there. So if you're running a mental health charity, there are countless examples of mental health charities who have moved their services to digital in that document. And this is one of the principles that we're trying to get across to everyone in all of these calls is, whatever you're doing, and no matter how niche you think it is, someone somewhere globally has done it already. So look in that document to find some of that best practice. So whether it's about starting up a bot to get complex information to people, or whether it's about installing live chat in your websites. We had a really good speaker, one of the last calls, Peter Jacobs from Bernardo's, talking about how they've moved services for vulnerable children onto WhatsApp. Now, again, he had to make that kind of toss up between WhatsApp has some security concerns, but actually when we speak to our users, this is the platform they're telling us that they want to use. They did a lot of work around safeguarding, and in that document is a link to Bernardo's basically describing exactly how that process works, all the safeguarding they've done. So as an organization, you don't need to think, right, we need to use WhatsApp. How on earth do you do that? How do we safeguard our users? We're going to get half of this wrong, because another charity has been really open about how that process works. So go and explore that and go and look at how some of that works for other organizations. So I'm just going to finish up by saying...
I think Beth wanted to say something.
Cool.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that. One of the things when Ross asked earlier, we're looking for some feedback and help around all of the content. One of the things we're starting to play around with is how we can maybe curate some of the stuff out of that Google Doc to make it slightly more accessible and easier for people to find. Because I'm conscious if you haven't been on the call and you're faced with the document, it can be quite scary to know which one's the most relevant, which is the most useful for me. So some of that is through blogs and the DigiListen podcasts, but there might be other ways we could do that. So again, if you had any spare time, I know we're all crazy busy, but if you could spare any time and wanted to have a bit of a chat with me or one of the team about how you found the Google Doc, if it's been useful, and maybe ideas about how we might curate that in different ways, then drop me a DM or email digital@scvo.org.uk. It'd be great to hear from you. Thanks.
Perfect, yeah, that's really useful. Just actually as a quick shortcut as well, just to say on those Google Docs, if you probably all know this, but just that simple thing of using Control and F to find whatever it is. So if you work for a counselling organisation and you don't want to scroll your way through all the million examples that are in that Google Doc, just use Control and F and type in counselling. You'll find all the counselling examples. I know that's really obvious, but it's a good way of getting through what is quite a big document. Okay, so thank you, Jen, Lewis, Sam, and Torben for your contributions. So I'm really, really good, easy to take away points from people there. The video will go up on the Third Sector Lab Facebook page. There'll also be a link to that on the SCVO website. There's a podcast that comes out with all these calls, so DigiListen. So you can listen back to all the content from all of these previously. So that's available on iTunes, on Spotify, and on Anchor, and pretty much all the other major podcasting platforms. So it's just DigiListen. Yeah, and thank you very much for coming along. You can sign up for a Friday call, which is Crisis Housing. We've got a call on Tuesday with Zoe Amar, which is about digital leadership. And then next Friday is about people where English is second language, and particularly around refugee and asylum seeker groups in Scotland and the rest of the UK. So thank you very much for coming along. It was good to see you all. I'll do the obligatory wave until everyone leaves the call. It's kind of like partly polite, but partly really rude, kind of. Just leave, just everyone go. Oh, Maddie, are we staying on, Maddie? Are we okay? Oh, you're on mute.
Oh. You should see my tweeting. It's absolutely awful. I was mistweeting folk. I was like, okay, oh God, that's not actually them. That's somebody else.